strong as they are, had a lot of weight to support, and apparently, I'm not a structural engineer, but I'm just guessing now that they gave way. The loss of life here is going to be enormous.
May God help those who are there, and the victims and their families, and all the souls that are lost today.
Can you tell me what you saw, what you heard? You all right?
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Look at this guy. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. This poor woman. Wow.
United 93, Cleveland, do you still hear the center? United 93, do you still hear Cleveland? United 93, United 903, do you hear Cleveland?
80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, this United Airlines Flight 93 crashed.
From the size of the impact crater, it would appear as though the angle of descent or angle of attack had to be nearly straight in.
I think the pilot downed the plane in a remote area because, you know, there wasn't very many houses over there where it went down. And I don't know, it's really, the whole thing is just unbelievable.
This is clearly a national catastrophe. There will be some response from the White House. Let's go to Wendell Goler, who was traveling with the president in Sarasota, Florida, and find out what the latest is there. Wendell?
John, the president left Sarasota, Florida. Air Force One took off just a short while ago to convene a meeting of his national security advisors, including the vice president, the heads of the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the FBI, and also New York Governor Pataki. After the two attacks on the Twin Towers in New York, he was briefed by his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, who phoned him after the first attack. Mr. Bush was actually reading to some children when the second attack occurred. Chief of Staff Andy Card interrupted him, told him about the attack. It was clear at that point we were dealing with terrorists.
I want to bring into the conversation General Al Haig, the former Secretary of State. General Haig, at a time like this, how does America respond prudently, with the proper amount of caution, and yet with whatever force needs to be applied?
Well, first, we have to know the full limits of this tragedy, and it's unprecedented, of course. But we have to stay, above all, united and calm and ready to take resolute action, which sometimes we have failed to do in the recent past, when the perpetrators are uncovered, and we have many, many indicators of precisely who they are. This was too broadly based a terrorist act to be just a few crazies. This is a terrorist movement, and we know where they're located today. And obviously, as a nation, we're going to have to take action against them.
Oh, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes. Oh,
When it comes down,
all right. We do need to put it down now. I think we need to put it down now. Here we go.
America, offer a prayer.
It has now been a full year since this country was so hideously attacked, and there is understandable relief that no further attack has occurred. But tonight we're still under a heightened alert, and the country is struggling to find the right balance between the imperative of freedom and the necessity of security. So it may be well to remember how effectively a dedicated enemy willing to die used our openness and freedoms against us, and well to note, too, that the attacks were years in the planning. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has been investigating the terror network, and he joins us live from Washington tonight. Carl?
Britt, the terrorists just in recent days have again made their presence known. The intelligence services have picked up new threats. The government has issued new warnings. And Al-Qaeda itself has released a new videotape timed this week to mark the anniversary of their atrocity. This videotape was clearly made after the attacks. It purports to have the voice of Osama bin Laden himself on it, congratulating the hijackers for their evil deeds. The video actually shows the hijackers themselves before the attacks reviewing flight manuals. They had not yet shaved their beards, and they were boasting about what they clearly knew was a suicide mission to kill innocent victims. They were here, living among us. Simple homes, low-key lifestyles, avoiding attention as the Al-Qaeda handbook demands. A 3-year plot leading to the worst attack and intelligence failure in America's history. Undetected, 19 of them on the morning of September 11th headed for airports in Washington, New Jersey, Boston, with box cutters. Terrorism expert Dr. Bruce Hoffman of Rand Corporation.
The desire to demonstrate their force in their minds necessitated mass killing on a scale that we hadn't seen before.
This security shot of suspected ringleader Mohammed Atta strolling through an airport metal detector is the final image before the atrocity that changed America. His journey began years earlier in Hamburg, Germany, with fellow hijackers Ziad Jarrah and Marwan al-Shehi, university students. They were recruited by Al-Qaeda talent scout Mohammed Zamar. Once radicalized, it was on to Al-Qaeda's camps in Afghanistan, replacing their passports afterwards to conceal where they'd been. On tourist visas, they came on separate flights. Atta's cell headed for Florida. The others blended into New Jersey and California. Training for their mission accelerated at flight schools in Florida, California, and Arizona. Atta traveled around Europe in the months before the attack, Spain and Italy, where Fox News has learned there was a final critical planning meeting. He met there with Osama bin Laden's European planner, Ben Hamiz, who had been plotting follow-up attacks across Europe. They were ultimately thwarted. But those final meetings moved the money and the plot to their final stages. Ramzi bin al-Shibh, originally tasked as a hijacker, was denied entry to the U.S. He became instead the money man for the terrorists and is still at large. Deputy Treasury Secretary Ken Dam is in charge of choking off terror cash.
They used commercial banks. They used money transmitting organizations, like for wire transfers. In many cases, they carried bulk cash. They carried around in satchels.
In the 6 months before the attacks, Fox News has learned there were multiple warnings from Israel, France, Egypt, India, England, Germany, Italy, and Russia. U.S. intelligence called it all too vague, but some warnings specifically mentioned hijackings, and in August, some called the threat imminent. At the National Security Agency, September 10th, phone calls were intercepted between Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia. They indicated an attack might be imminent. They were not translated until September 12th. We'd been under attack for years. The bombing of the USS Cole in 2000, our embassies in East Africa in '98, the Millennium Plot to bomb Los Angeles International Airport, and of course the World Trade Centers themselves had already been targeted in 1993. Ramzi Youssef was convicted as the mastermind of that bombing. He was later in on a 1995 Filipino terrorist plot to blow up 12 jetliners over the Pacific and dive bomb others into key U.S. targets, including the CIA. It was foiled. Former CIA officer and Fox contributor Larry Johnson.
We knew since 1995 that individuals connected with bin Laden were talking about hijacking planes and flying them into government buildings. As an intelligence analyst, that's all you need.
It was not enough. Investigators tell Fox News these two cased San Diego's massive naval base for targets too. Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Midar were known to the CIA. They'd been ID'd in January of 2000 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, at what turned out to have been a planning meeting for the attack on the USS Cole. CIA emailed FBI about them, but it slipped through the cracks. FBI said emails are given lower priority than intelligence warnings transmitted on paper. The two were eventually put on the terrorist watch list in late August, just weeks before the attacks. But that was long after the State Department, unaware of their activities, had issued them multi-entry visas to the United States. The State Department's Ed Vasquez.
You can't operate blind. If you don't have data on people who would do us harm, it's very, very difficult to red flag them from a universe of applicants.
2 months before the attacks, Phoenix FBI agent Ken Williams wrote headquarters, warning of potential Middle East terrorists in U.S. flight schools he wanted to investigate. He was ignored. It could have made all the difference when it came to indicted 20th hijacker Zacarias Moussaoui in August. Had the Minnesota FBI known about the Phoenix warning, search warrants for Moussaoui's computers might not have been denied. Only after the attacks was his computer searched and the potential clues found. As Ground Zero smoldered in the aftermath of September 11th, the U.S. began the biggest investigation ever undertaken. Foreign intelligence on the hijackers began to trickle in. Then it turned out the killers had had prior brushes with U.S. authorities, too. Miami International Airport officials knew of Atta and Al-Shehi. They once rented a small plane which, after they'd landed it, stalled on the runway. The two men simply abandoned the plane and left the airport. There were simple traffic violations, as seen in this police video.
How you doing today? Safe, please.
One terrorist paid his ticket avoiding a court date, and 3 months earlier a warrant was issued for Atta when his ticket went unpaid.
Free to go.
For a year, most U.S. officials have said the attacks could not have been prevented. But now the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Florida Democrat Bob Graham, who has seen classified material, tells Fox News it could have been foiled if all the clues had been centrally analyzed in the first place.
Had that occurred and had there been some luck in following up on those patterns, I think there is a chance that September the 11th could have been identified before the hijackers got on the airplanes and therefore avoided one of the most horrific events in American history.
Indeed, over the last year, the U.S. has improved its intelligence and law enforcement capabilities, as well as sharing information with foreign governments. Still, intelligence services say al-Qaeda does remain, quote, operational worldwide. For the last 36 hours, the U.S. has been at the second highest level of terrorism alert, code orange or high. The U.S. government will only publicly say that they have received information from a senior al-Qaeda official who has told them that there were plots timed to mark the anniversary of 9/11 to attack U.S. targets in Southeast Asia. Fox News has learned the person in question is Omar al-Farouk. He was once the top coordinator for al-Qaeda throughout Southeast Asia. He was arrested in June in Jakarta, Indonesia, and has told his interrogators that before he was arrested, he did dispatch cells for truck and car bombs throughout the region. As of this moment, Britt, none of them have come to fruition.
Carl, thank you very much. Operation Enduring Freedom delivered a precise and deliberate blow to the terror group behind the 9/11 attacks, defeating Osama bin Laden and scattering his al-Qaeda terrorists. That was the key objective. But do the scattered remnants of this terror network still pose a threat? For this story, we turn to Fox News correspondent Geraldo Rivera, who is live in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. Good evening, Geraldo.
Hey, Britt. The United States on September 11th was like a champion fighter staggered by a sucker punch. But like a true champ, it didn't take us long to get up off the canvas and go in pursuit of the sneak attackers who had done us so wrong. So it's a year later. How have we done? Not bad, most experts agree. Virtually every major terrorist base, like this one here in Tora Bora, Afghanistan, have been utterly destroyed. And many hundreds of al-Qaeda and Taliban operatives, like 8 earlier today, have been killed or captured. But what about the terror mastermind himself? What about Osama bin Laden?
They used to put out there in the Old West a wanted poster. It said, wanted, dead or alive.
In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, the president paints a $25 million bullseye on the suspected mastermind. Recalling our roots of crime and punishment, bin Laden becomes America's public enemy #1. Hours after the U.S. begins the actual bombing campaign in Afghanistan, on October 7th, Osama bin Laden releases his first wartime video, basically praising September 11th and rallying Islam to wage holy war. While most of the terrorist leadership remains unaccounted for, including the Taliban chief Mullah Omar and al-Qaeda henchman Ayman al-Zawahiri, Guantanamo Bay and other cells in Asia and elsewhere are stuffed with scores of al-Qaeda operatives, including Abu Zubaydah, the highest-ranking, most wanted terrorist captured so far. But throughout most of 2001, at least, his former boss remains alive and at large, his existence proven by various videotapes. Recorded weeks earlier, this 20-minute diatribe surfaces on November the 3rd. On November 8th, prominent Pakistani journalist Hamid Mir interviews bin Laden for the 3rd time, as he did on the previous 2 occasions. Mir proves the date of his interview with a photograph.
I think that I can claim that I was the last independent journalist who saw him alive.
A confident and apparently healthy bin Laden tells Hamid Mir that he and the Taliban leadership will soon be evacuating all of Afghanistan's big cities to wage a guerrilla war in the mountains. By the next day, bin Laden has apparently made his way to the southern city of Kandahar. The Taliban's last remaining stronghold is under furious attack, but bin Laden had strong reason for risking the 300-mile journey. His son's father-in-law, Muhammad Atef, bin Laden's chief of operations, has just been killed in an American airstrike. And speculation is that bin Laden attends Atef's funeral near Kandahar on or around November the 9th. If so, the funeral does nothing to dampen bin Laden's mood. Called the Smoking Gun, this amateur video shows bin Laden at dinner in Kandahar, bragging of prior operational knowledge of the September 11th attacks. Despite subsequent letters and news releases, like the alleged email to a London-based Arab-language newspaper, and despite attempts to recycle and repackage old material, what follows is the last reliable sighting on this earth of Osama bin Laden. Released by Al Jazeera on the 26th of December 2001, it shows a now gaunt and possibly ill, but still defiant man. Analysis of the references the tape contains indicate it is at most a few weeks old. During those few weeks in December, something happens in eastern Afghanistan that might hold the answer to the $25 million question. It is the Battle of Tora Bora. Most international intelligence agencies agree with the U.S. assessment that bin Laden is probably here when the land assault on Tora Bora begins on the 5th of December. It is the second week of December 2001, and Al-Qaeda is on the ropes. We hear them in Arabic talking about laying down their arms and surrendering. The United States strongly suspects the obvious, that the requested ceasefire is a hoax to allow the beaten terrorists some breathing room in which to escape. Yet over the objections of Hazrat Ali, the Afghan military commander, local Afghan politicians grant a 24-hour ceasefire, later extending it to 36 hours. So even as our mighty B-52s circle overhead, honoring a ceasefire the United States had warned against and does not believe in, many Afghans believe the Al-Qaeda chief escapes.
When I found out about the ceasefire, I said to my commanders, they just want to betray us.
Tora Bora falls to the Allies on December 16th, but bin Laden is not among those killed or captured. The phony ceasefire clearly provides him a golden opportunity to run, but to where, we may know. Yesterday, we follow a small river coming down out of the White Mountains, on the lookout for yet undiscovered Al-Qaeda hideouts. In a Fox News exclusive, we find something else instead. After a 3-hour march, we discover an ideal escape route to Pakistan. I make our position right about here, 070.11 east longitude, 34.05 north latitude. I put us right about here, this white. This is Pakistan. If we could make it into Pakistan, clearly Osama bin Laden could. Although the question of Osama dead or alive is impossible for us to answer, he clearly had the means and the opportunity to make good an escape to Pakistan. But if he is at large, it may not be for long.
A great many nations on this planet are very interested in the man if he is still alive. And I'll leave you by saying, if he is still alive, it's only a matter of time.
Dead or just desperate and on the run, as long as we keep the pressure on, Osama bin Laden is unlikely to have the command and control capability of launching another terrorist strike. And the amazing thing about it is that the longer he stays invisible, alive or dead, the more demoralized his followers will become. Remember, he and the Taliban warned us that waging this war would only cause more agony for America. That has not been the case. We are winning the war on terror. Back to you, Britt.
Geraldo, thank you. Since we learned about the terrorists behind last year's attacks, Americans might rightly wonder what Muslims in this country have to say about the violent aspects of a radical culture that fosters hatred in the name of God. President Bush asked Americans on Tuesday to remember that our enemy is a terrorist network, not a religion. But among many Muslim groups, there has been at least as much disapproval of America's response to the atrocities of a year ago as there was to the attacks themselves. And Fox News' Bill O'Reilly asks the question, where's the outrage?
There are estimates of anywhere from 2 to 7 million Muslims living in the USA, and most have been publicly silent since 9/11. As far as we can tell, there have been no big rallies, no big demonstrations to speak of in support of America and against radical Islam. And that's something that's very controversial even within the Muslim community. Tashba Sayed is a journalist and editor of Pakistan Today. Ibrahim Hooper is the communications director for the Council on American Islamic Relations. And Khurram Wahid is a defense attorney who defended 60 Muslim detainees in South Florida. Why haven't we seen, Mr. Wahid, mass demonstrations in Washington, D.C. of American Muslims in support of the war on terror, speaking out against radical Islam? Why have we not seen those demonstrations?
In truth, because since September 11th, the Muslim population in America has been put on the defensive. They've, for the most part, been accused of being either in cahoots with these terrorists or in some way supporting these terrorists. And for the most part, the Muslim community has been dealing with those issues. They really haven't had time to feel like they're part of this whole movement.
So you're telling me that in 12 months, the American Muslim community didn't have time to show all the other Americans that they have solidarity in the war against radical Islam? You're telling me they didn't have time?
No, that's not what I'm saying. You asked about a rally in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Right. They had time to show their solidarity.
Why haven't they?
They have.
When?
They've issued condemnations left, right, and
Who?
center.
Can I
Go
speak
ahead.
to that? First of all, our organization did sponsor a rally immediately after the 9/11 attacks, a rally against terrorism.
How many people showed up?
Hundreds of people showed up.
Hundreds?
Oh, this was in Dallas, by the way, where the community is smaller. But we issued condemnations. I have with me 40 pages of
But
condemnations.
that's easy. Anybody can do that. Look, what I'm saying to you guys
We
is...
offered blood. We offered Muslims to go to the site, Muslim doctors, Muslim relief workers.
It seems to me, gentlemen, if I were a Muslim leader, I would say all loyal American Muslims must gather here on this date in a tremendous rally to show solidarity with the USA and oppose radical Islam.
We did see it here. We in the United States have said we are against Osama bin Laden. We were part of the mass American movement to support the victims of 9/11. We didn't do a separate event necessarily, but in all the communities across this country, I was personally involved with many, just local schools and libraries and local...
Right, but aren't you disappointed in your Muslim brothers overseas not mobilizing against radical Islam?
We're disappointed with many things to do with the Muslim
wait a minute. Well,
community
this
overseas.
thing is the most important.
If there's hate speech overseas, we're against it. Okay, there's hate speech. There's hate speech in this country against Islam.
This is the mistake you're making, Mr. Hooper. This is the enormous mistake you're making. You are reacting to stupidity, all right, instead of being proactive in fighting what's really important, radical Islam.
But we have been doing that. We've been meeting with...
It's not on anybody's
But you know
radar
what? But
screen.
average people, the people who are working every day, going to school, feeding their kids, doing the things that everyone else in the United States is doing, these people support exactly what our government wants to do.
But you have
root
to
out
mobilize
terrorism.
them together so their voices are heard. All right, now, I want to get into one more very, very important thing. Mr. Sayed is a journalist, all right? And he has written and told us here at Fox that he can find terrorists, Muslim terrorists, in this country anytime he wants to, that right now want to kill Americans. Is that true?
I cannot find the terrorist, but I have come into contact with people who are trying to convince and win over people to act against America.
Are they here in the United States?
They are here in America. I have met them here. They are trying to spread kind of a discontent among Muslims that if they do not join the Islamist organizations, they will be left alone on their own and they will find themselves in concentration camps.
But I don't think that this is pervasive in America. A lot of people doing this. We just had 3 guys charged in Detroit with being, you know, part of a cell of Al-Qaeda or whatever. Quite frankly, I don't think there are many Muslims who want to kill Americans.
No, there are not many. You're going to have bad apples in any community.
But you have to expect the fact that you as Muslims are going to have a little scrutiny put on you because we're fighting radical Islam. Am I wrong?
I know that of the 24 indictments of the 1,200 people we detained, 1 or 2 of them were real indictments.
There were only 200 detained, not thousands, all right?
I would disagree.
Very small number. Mr. Wahid, I'm going to give you the last word here.
Most people came to the United States for freedom. And when we came here with the idea of building a family for ourselves, building an economic base, and in some way trying to contribute to this society. Now, what's happened on September 11th, they look at as a crime. And I think that the abuses or the demonization of Muslims has led to it being easier to enact laws and to in some way marginalize Muslims. And most of those, as you've seen, have resulted in detentions that, for the most part, do not pan out as any sort of a viable charge.
The fact is that 129 people were charged as a result of the 9/11 investigations. All are believed to be Muslims.
Bill, thank you. At this time, some of our Fox stations will break away for a brief local news update. For the rest, stay with us as Fox News special coverage continues. Everyone.
This is Fox 11's special coverage of 9/11, the day America changed.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Christine Devine. Across Southern California tonight, more vigils for the victims of 9/11. Tony Valdez was there tonight as the bells tolled in San Pedro.
That one is in honor of all those who died in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. This one for all those who died in the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
Two more peals of the bell rang out for the victims who died at the Pentagon in the crash of United Flight 93 near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The Firefighters Memorial Wall ended its journey in San Pedro tonight after traveling across LA County earlier today. Both the city and county of Los Angeles held emotional ceremonies marking 9/11. Doves were released at the unveiling of a new sculpture at the Civic Center in downtown LA. The two black towers list the names of all who died in the Trade Center attacks. As you heard, a bugler then played taps. At City Hall in downtown LA, a huge American flag draped the side of the building. Below the flag, an honor guard represented the LAPD. Children played key roles in this commemoration, first by leading everyone in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
The LA Children's Choir then sang the national anthem. After a moment of silence, a procession walked from City Hall to the new LA Cathedral. "3,000 people attended an interfaith service held at Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral. The service reflected the cultural diversity of LA. A special tribute was paid to Californians who lost loved ones in the terrorist attacks. Also honored police officers and firefighters who risk their lives every day. The Coliseum, home to so many legendary sporting events, became a place to remember the fallen heroes of 9/11. The Olympic torch, a beacon that ushered in the Summer Games in 1984, is burning tonight as a memorial candle to honor those killed in the attacks. And right there, a dose of patriotism over the skies of Los Angeles. These special United We Stand banners, along with the American flag, have been flying all over the LA area today. The tribute, courtesy of a company better known for its paid commercial messages. Today, the pilots donated their time helping to spread the message of unity. More tonight on the news at 10 o'clock. We'll see you then.
Despite the view of many experts that Afghanistan was ill-suited to American military capability, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan was a major success. Although 41 Americans were killed and Afghanistan remains a dangerous and difficult place, U.S. forces made remarkably quick work of a Taliban enemy that skeptics had said would be hard to find, harder still to attack. For a look at how it happened, we turn to Fox News Pentagon correspondent Brett Baer, who reports tonight from an area of the Pentagon rarely seen on television, the U.S. Navy's Command Center. Hello, Brett.
Hey, Brett, this is the U.S. Navy's Operations Center, the 24/7 top-secret nerve center for U.S. naval operations worldwide. This is an extremely rare look at a place from which the U.S. Navy directs missions in the war on terrorism. Now, the reason this room is new is because the old Ops Center was in the direct path of American Airlines Flight 77 when it struck the Pentagon 1 year ago today. 42 people in the ops center, including 8 people who were working the floor like these folks here, didn't get out alive. Now, senior defense officials tell Fox just 3 hours after that plane hit, military orders were given. The military was on the move, and plans were being made to go after those responsible.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
23 days later, America struck back.
The only way to deal with it is to take the battle to where they are and to root them out.
This just-released video from an F-16 on a bombing run shows the very first targets hit inside Afghanistan on October 7th. Loaded with bombs painted in memory of fallen firefighters and policemen, U.S. fighter pilots set out to destroy al-Qaeda training camps and Taliban air defenses. And after just 2 nights of precision airstrikes,
We believe we are now able to carry out strikes more or less around the clock.
on the ground and in secret, U.S. soldiers were already working with Afghan opposition groups from the very start of the U.S. campaign. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld.
It was quite obvious that this was going to be a bit more like an iceberg. There would be some small portion above the surface of the sea, and then the bulk of what was taking place would be down below and not visible.
Not visible until October 19th, when more than 100 special ops troops parachuted into an airfield in southern Afghanistan, the Taliban leader's personal compound, with video cameras in tow. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Richard Myers.
The intent was to send a message to adversaries that we're going to do whatever it takes.
But it was the invisible work by U.S. Special Forces soldiers calling in airstrikes and directing Afghan opposition fighters that made the difference.
The ones in the light camouflage garb are in fact American Special Forces.
On horseback.
On horseback in Afghanistan.
To embed talented U.S. Special Forces people in with each of these various so-called warlords or local armies and have them develop confidence in each other and then begin to connect our air power to what they were doing on the ground. That turned the tide.
One by one, the Afghan cities started to fall to the U.S.-led opposition forces. The Taliban stronghold of Kandahar was the last to fall. Commanding General Tommy Franks.
Taliban forces have been engaged as they have moved out of the city of Kandahar.
From the air, escaping al-Qaeda and Taliban convoys were identified and destroyed.
You'll see an individual walk between the two vehicles just before a guided munition destroys both vehicles.
The white specks that were adjacent to it in the lower right-hand corner of the vehicle were infantry troops.
Hundreds of captured enemy fighters were taken to Afghan prisons around the country. Prisoners held at a fortress near Mazar-e Sharif had managed to smuggle weapons inside. On November 25th, they took over, killing 40 Afghan guards and 1 American, CIA officer Mike Spann, the first American killed by enemy fire. After 3 days of bloodshed and more than 400 prisoners killed, the uprising was put down with the help of U.S. and British special forces. American John Walker Lind was one of the Taliban fighters taken alive.
There are a lot more of them out there. And so what we'll continue to do is move them around, keep them on the move, keep them desynchronized, and continue to tighten the noose.
In late November, the noose had tightened on a massive mountain range along the Afghan-Pakistan border. U.S. warplanes constantly bombed grouping al-Qaeda fighters in the Tora Bora region. By spring, the hunt took U.S. troops further south.
Where's that fire coming from?
An operation called Anaconda, designed to squeeze the gathering al-Qaeda fighters out of their mountain hideouts. In the largest ground action of the war, with more than 1,000 U.S. troops and 1,500 Afghan soldiers. First Lieutenant Darren McDonough commanded one of the first groups of soldiers to fly into the fight.
As we were landing,
rounds were hitting the helicopter, and the tail gunner on the Chinook was returning fire with his 60. So right off the bat, it was, this is real.
8 U.S. soldiers lost their lives in that valley in the first days of the battle. 18 days and more than 3,500 bombs later, Operation Anaconda was over. Hundreds of the enemy were believed dead, but an unknown number got away.
Roger, we found a cave. We've also got the rest of the squad right now following the footprints.
We took them on in their backyard, the place where the Russians were defeated time and time again. They called it the meat grinder because they lost so many people in there. We went in there, killed several hundreds of Al-Qaeda, so they have left and they've gone to other places. They've been flushed, and we have to go find them.
U.S. soldiers are assisting in the hunt for Al-Qaeda in Pakistan and training soldiers for the challenge in the Philippines, Yemen, and the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. Yet top Al-Qaeda leaders are still nowhere to be found.
I don't know where they are, but I do know that if they're alive and functioning, they're having a dickens of a time running their terrorist network, and that's just fine for us. Our target was to free the Afghan people from the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda repressive leadership and get them out of the country, and that's been done.
What is the next stop for the U.S. military? Most say Iraq, to take out Saddam Hussein and the threat he poses with his mounting weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein is a serious threat. He is a significant problem, and it's something that this country must deal with.
The Bush administration is making the case that the Iraqi dictator must be taken out soon.
The risk of inaction are far greater than the risk of action.
While the conflict in Afghanistan may be the first battle of the 21st century, it certainly won't be the last.
Steadfast in our purpose, we now press on. We have known freedom's price. We have shown freedom's power. And in this great conflict, my fellow Americans, we will see freedom's victory. May God bless.
As of tonight, 9,500 members of the U.S. military are still in Afghanistan trying to track down terrorists and helping that country prepare to eventually take over its own security. But still, at the same time, the U.S. military is getting ready for possible action in Iraq. Brett?
Brett Baer, thank you very much. Earlier this evening, President Bush addressed the nation from Ellis Island here in New York. Fox News senior White House correspondent Jim Angle reports on what the president had to say. Jim?
Brett, the president gave a speech of only about 7 minutes. The White House believed that the nation was probably emotionally exhausted after a full day of remembrances and recollections of loved ones who were lost in the terrorist attacks. The president told the nation that a long year has passed since those attacks and that we have seen the images so many times they are seared on our souls, and acknowledged that reliving the anguish from them is hard and painful.
For those who lost loved ones, it's been a year of sorrow, of empty places, of newborn children who will never know their fathers here on earth. For members of our military, it's been a year of sacrifice and service far from home. For all Americans, it has been a year of adjustment, of coming to terms with the difficult knowledge that our nation has determined enemies and that we are not invulnerable to their attacks. September the 11th, 2001 will always be a fixed point in the life of America. The loss of so many lives left us to examine our own. Each of us was reminded that we are here only for a time. And these counted days should be filled with things that last and matter. Love for our families, love for our neighbors, and for our country. Gratitude for life and to the giver of life. We resolved a year ago to honor every last person lost. We owe them remembrance, and we owe them more. We owe them and their children and our own the most enduring monument we can build, a world of liberty and security made possible by the way America leads and by the way Americans lead our lives. There is a line in our time, and in every time, between those who believe that all men are created equal and those who believe that some men and women and children are expendable in the pursuit of power. There is a line in our time and in every time between the defenders of human liberty and those who seek to master the minds and souls of others. Our generation has now heard history's call, and we will answer it. America has entered a great struggle that tests our strength and even more our resolve. Our nation is patient and steadfast. We continue to pursue the terrorists in cities and camps and caves across the earth. We are joined by a great coalition of nations to rid the world of terror. And we will not allow any terrorist or tyrant to threaten civilization with weapons of mass murder. Now and in the future, Americans will live as free people, not in fear, and never at the mercy of any foreign plot or power. Tomorrow is September the 12th. A milestone is passed, and a mission goes on. Be confident. Our country is strong. And our cause is even larger than our country. Ours is the cause of human dignity, freedom guided by conscience, and guarded by peace. This ideal of America is the hope of all mankind. That hope drew millions to this harbor. That hope still lights our way. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. May God bless America.
Now, Brett, obviously the president is hoping to renew the nation's resolve here for the challenges ahead, and he pointed to some of those challenges, though this was clearly a speech about remembrance and recollection and those who were lost. There was a veiled reference to men like Saddam Hussein and those of his ilk when the president said, "We will not allow any terrorist or tyrant to threaten civilization with weapons of mass murder. Now and in the future, Americans will live as a free people, not in fear and never at the mercy of a foreign plot or power." Now, today, obviously, the president was intent on comforting the nation. Tomorrow, he will be challenging the world in a speech at the United Nations, where he will ask, what more does the world need to know about Saddam Hussein before it takes action to disarm him? Britt?
Jim, I can't help but remark on the setting for this speech. Convenient, of course, because he was going to be here for his visit to Ground Zero anyway, but also it struck me, chosen with some care perhaps by him and his team. You've heard the president say, and I've heard you report on it many times, as he often does, that the attacks of 9/11 were an attack on freedom itself. And so there he was in that quite exquisitely lit shot, nice stagecraft there, of the Statue of Liberty, and a symbol as well, I think, Jim, of the fact that this is a country that has welcomed people of all races, faiths, and nationalities. A speech that comes at a time when he is being criticized for his attitude toward other races, faiths, and nationalities.
Well, a criticism that is somewhat unjustified, Britt. Yesterday, for instance, the president visited the Afghan embassy in Washington and called on people to resist any temptation to blame all Muslims for what happened on September 11th, to blame all Muslims for what has happened with Muslim extremists. He has been very clear on that message. That is something that has been in almost everything he has said about this, including remarks he made today. Clearly, the sign of the Statue of Liberty over his shoulder was a very important symbolic statement about what he says this cause is all about, that it is to defend freedom, and that the terrorists are those who hate freedom, a phrase you've heard him mention dozens of times in the last year. So this was a very important setting, one that really topped off a day that was involved much more with scenes of devastation. Ground Zero here in New York City, the scene in Pennsylvania where Flight 93 went down, and of course the now rebuilt Pentagon.
You know, Jim, I had an interview, as you know, the other day with Mrs. Bush, who was talking about the president and how he disciplined himself in the immediate aftermath of the events of 9/11 and the speeches that he gave, and how he was very careful, you'll recall, at that service at the National Cathedral to make sure that he didn't lock eyes with his sister Dorothy, because he thought if they ever looked at each other, the famous lachrymose tendencies of the Bush families would come to the fore, and the president would find himself in tears. And I noticed tonight there was no trace of that, although the president spoke with evident feeling. But earlier today, I thought at the Pentagon, he was quite emotional, and in making the remark, particularly that people had been killed by these terrorists simply because they were Americans.
Well, that's right, Brett. I mean, as you note, the president has said many times that the Bushes are weepers, as he puts it, and he is often touched. That was clear at the Pentagon today. You saw at one point when people were cheering a flyover from jets, he had bowed his head, he looked up, his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. He also seemed to feel the same way when he got to Pennsylvania. As he walked toward the memorial, he was clearly struggling with his emotions. A lot of very difficult memories for the president today, Brett.
Jim Angle, thank you very much. President Bush at Ellis Island, New York, 1 year to the day after this nation was attacked and his presidency was transformed. This was the second in a set, really, of 3 speeches the president will deliver over these 2 days, today and tomorrow. The first, of course, at the Pentagon earlier today. You just heard him tonight. And tomorrow, he goes before the United Nations for a speech that will be very different, it would seem, from the speech he has delivered to his countrymen tonight, a speech addressed really to the world, a speech that seeks to rally the world. So as the president proceeds through the set of speeches, each one an opportunity, a tool, if you will, for him to show leadership, we turn for analysis to Fox News analyst Fred Barnes, executive editor of the Weekly Standard, Mort Kondracki, executive editor of Roll Call, and Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard. They're in our Washington bureau tonight, Fox News contributors all. Bill, first to you. As I was noting, these speeches are opportunities as well as challenges for a president. This one perhaps in some geopolitical terms far less important than tomorrow's, but an important one nonetheless as he seeks to keep the country and perhaps through the country, the Congress behind him.
An important one, I think, and he could simply have expressed sorrow and grief and remembrance for those who died, but he points ahead as well. You know, we have a mission ahead of us. What our enemies have begun, we will finish. We will not allow any terrorist or tyrant to threaten civilization with weapons of mass destruction. So I think he carefully, in an appropriate way, in a speech that's mostly a memorial, also reminds us of the task ahead.
Mort Kondracki?
Yeah, the modern president is partly the nation's clergyman, and the nation's maybe even psychotherapist, has to express grief and sorrow, but his fundamental job, and I think Bush has done it better than anybody else has today, and he's almost done it alone, is to be the moral leader of the country, to say where we're going, why we're going there, what our values are, and to rally the nation to this defiant cause of fighting the enemies of freedom. And he signaled tomorrow's speech when he said that we will not allow any terrorist or tyrant to threaten civilization with weapons of mass murder. There he's talking about Saddam Hussein, not just the al-Qaeda terrorists.
Fred Barnes, the one thing he did hear from the president was a reflection on faith. It comes up often in his comments. Mm-hmm. He's more bold about it than some presidents have been in the past. It seems to be a theme.
Well, it seems to be a theme, and he hired a speechwriter, Mike Gerson, who went to a Christian college, Wheaton College, and is well equipped to write this sort of speech. In this one, he talked about the giver of life. That is God, and that's mentioned in almost every speech. A part of this speech was designed to tell Americans that, you know, the core of America, our principles, our character, those are sound, those are alive, those are still living. Assure people that we're going to move ahead, try to revive that spirit of commitment to the war on terrorism. And I think Mort is exactly right that this paves the way for the speech tomorrow. He didn't mention Iraq or Saddam Hussein by name, but everything he says in here points exactly in the direction of regime change in Iraq.
Earlier in the day, in this speech at the Pentagon, he really signaled what it was all about. He said that what happened to our nation on a September day set in motion the first great struggle of the new century. The enemy struck us who are determined and they're resourceful. They will not be stopped by a sense of decency or a hint of conscience, but they will be stopped. That's determination. I think, you know, every once in a while, Bush really rises to Churchillian levels, I think, with the help of speechwriters. I think he did at the Pentagon today.
Well, of course, he has made strong statements of this kind. We remember them from a year ago, but as I think many of us recall, he wasn't always agreed with at the time by many experts, although, and I want you to stand by because I want to come back to you briefly, but a year ago, you may recall, President Bush vowed to see justice be done, as he did tonight.
Tonight, we are a country awakened to danger and called to defend freedom. Our grief has turned to anger, and anger to resolution. Whether we bring our enemies to justice or bring justice to our enemies, justice will be done.
Despite the president's resolve, there were many voices predicting failure in the war, more attacks, and soon, and a near collapse of the U.S. economy. On the war, the press was quick to paint a dark picture. The Washington Post, September 17, 2001, Afghanistan, a nightmare battlefield. The Associated Press, September 22nd, called Afghanistan a calamitous trap. And many experts believed the U.S. was weak and unprepared, and our enemy was strong and determined. More attacks were coming, they said, any day now, a view echoed even in the halls of Congress.
I don't think there's any doubt that they're not done. The terrorists are going to strike again.
Headlines and editorials from last September held the same message. Worst may be yet to come, said a Rocky Mountain News editorial. The Cleveland Plain Dealer, nuclear industry's attack deterrence called inadequate. USA Today, now it is America the vulnerable. But so far, despite the early and still chaotic state of our security improvements, our airports, our seaports, our rail lines, nuclear plants, water supplies, computer networks, and schools, as well as shopping malls, have not been the target of further attack. And then there were fears about our country's vulnerability to bioterror. Anthrax in the U.S. mail was sent to members of Congress and to some ordinary Americans, 5 of whom died. The anthrax attack certainly pointed up vulnerability, but after nearly a year of work, investigators doubt it was the work of Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist organization. And then there was the economic collapse, which so many experts predicted. Here was an exchange from the Fox News Channel program Bulls and Bears.
The NASDAQ has lost 75% of its value. The Dow will lose 75% of its value as well. 4,000 on the Dow Jones.
We're going to see Dow 4,000?
Dow 4,000.
Well, today the Dow Jones Industrial Averages closed well above the low of 82.35 on September 21st, 2001. And the U.S. economy, which was in recession that day, has, instead of faltering, recovered and continues to grow.
So, a question for my colleagues. Fred, why were so many people so wrong about what was going to happen?
Well, you know, you can call it the Vietnam syndrome, or you can call it, you know, the remnants from Desert One under President Carter. And people just didn't realize, one, the resolve of this president, two, the strength and ability of our military. You know, Brett, let me punctuate one other point. You know, the president's critics now say, including former President Clinton, by the way, say you have to win the war on terrorism first and then go after Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The president, in his speech tonight, links the two and says, without naming Iraq, says this is a part of the war on terrorism. When he's talking about tyrants with the weapons of mass murder, when he's talking about foreign powers, he's talking about Iraq and saying it is a part of the war on terrorism.
I agree that Vietnam thinking has a lot to do with the pessimism that greeted the effort in Afghanistan at the beginning, although it's worth noting that the President and the Secretary of Defense had to pound the table to get the United States forces out there to get the Northern Alliance moving so that it could capture Mazar-e-Sharif and then eventually Kabul. And win this war, you know, but we did that, and we did it rather more successfully than anybody thought. Now everybody's worried, you know, that Iraq will be a nightmare, that Baghdad will be Stalingrad. I mean, I think it's sort of in the nature since Vietnam of just to be worried about whether American arms can succeed.
Bill Kristol, is there a sense you have here that some people never learn?
Well, I wouldn't, count our chickens before they hatch. The war with Iraq could be difficult, not so much in Iraq, but there could be terrorists. Saddam could have the ability to unleash terror against us or against Americans abroad. And there could be further al-Qaeda attacks here. So I'm very glad that we've had a year that was much better than any of us expected, than I expected a year ago. But I do not count on the next year being as happy as this year, though I think the president will go ahead and remove Saddam and make the nation much more secure over the longer term. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that we're through the worst of it.
Right, and one might also add that one of the reasons why people are nervous about attacks is that the administration itself has been saying that we're going to get hit again. We well could be. We're on code orange as we speak.
Yeah, Brett, one of the odd things is, of course, that before the U.S. went into Afghanistan, the worry that the U.S. military wasn't strong enough. Now the worry among Europeans is that the U.S. military is too strong. I'd rather have it the second way.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. This nation's struggle to make itself more secure has proved an uneven and, as we've noted, at times a chaotic process. Screening at airports has so inconvenienced millions of travelers, but it did not prevent newspaper reporters recently from boarding flights carrying an array of forbidden weapons. That's but one example, and airports are but part of a huge job that involves borders, harbors, rail lines, and cyberspace. For the latest on what's being done to protect us, we have reports from Fox's Tony Snow at Portsmouth, Virginia Harbor, and Homeland Security correspondent Catherine Herridge at Reagan National Airport. Catherine?
Britt, as we learned a year ago, airline security is only as strong as its weakest link. Administration officials insist a lot has changed for the better since then, but is it enough to prevent another attack? Armed air marshals, bomb-sniffing dogs, random bag checks. The federal government has embarked on the most ambitious and sweeping changes to airline security in history. Homeland Security Director Tom Ridge.
Americans should feel safer flying. More federal screeners with regard to people and baggage, more air marshals, more security measures being taken at the airports. We've come a long, long way since September 11th.
Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta gave Fox News an exclusive look at the latest in terrorist fighting technology. This machine uses jets of air to detect explosive residue. It's one of the projects in development for the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA.
Your feet about shoulder width apart and arms out to the side.
The TSA is overseeing other major changes. By mid-November, transportation officials promise that all 429 commercial airports will have federal passenger screeners.
The kind of security that's in place today is very, very good, much improved from what it has been.
American Airlines pilot Linda Powells doesn't share the secretary's confidence. She and thousands of other pilots want to pack heat in the cockpit.
We need to be able to defend the cockpit against lethal intent, and the only defense against lethal intent is a firearm.
Congress wants to arm pilots. The TSA has made recommendations if a law is passed. But some transportation officials say armed federal air marshals are better trained to prevent another hijacking. But the program itself is under fire. Critics say marshals are on only a fraction of flights, and reports suggest others have quit, citing long hours and low morale. Are we taking the smart approach to airline security?
We are taking a huge amount of our resources and directing them into just one aspect of aviation security, and that is the passenger security.
Jim Hall is the former chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board.
We need to look at the design and of the aircraft and other things to address the threat in the air.
That threat could be in someone's suitcase. TSA officials insist they'll meet the ambitious year-end deadline for screening all checked baggage for explosives. But passengers should expect some delays at up to 30 airports that are not fully equipped. As for carry-on luggage, recent TSA undercover tests show passenger screeners failed to find fake weapons about 25% of the time.
absolutely not acceptable. There were some of those who were cut loose, some of those who were retrained.
The screening of the future could involve full body scans, a controversial technology which critics label virtual strip searches. Also biometrics, which uses fingerprint or iris recognition technology. Though billions of dollars are being spent, one of the fundamental reasons the skies are safer comes down to the passengers themselves.
I do kind of look around more so than what I did before. I also think it's safer just because the passengers are more alert.
There's a lot at stake because the number of people flying is down significantly over last year, and that's bad for the public, for the airline industry, and for the economy. Tony?
Thanks, Catherine. The war on terror has two fronts, the rest of the world and here at home. This explains why the president's top domestic priority is to defend Americans from terrorists, yet the enterprise seems almost incomprehensibly vast. A proposed Department of Homeland Security would employ 170,000 people and combine dozens of federal departments and agencies, yet the basics are pretty simple. Protect Americans by defending from assault by land, by air, and by sea. Consider this scenario. As sailors load a ship with ammunition before dawn, terrorists on a speeding motorboat open fire. Coast Guard crews streak into action, firing back. Meanwhile, a kayaker tries to plant a mine beneath the ship, but a land security crew foils him. This was one of dozens of scenarios played out recently by an elite 100-member Coast Guard unit. The 3rd Marine Safety and Security Team, created after September 11th to protect ports, set out to defend the SS Cape Juby, anchored in the Cape Fear River. The elite squads worked on key skills: high-speed boating, the use of force, and most importantly, sound tactics.
We received a lot of tactics that no one has ever seen before in the Coast Guard.
One exercise stressed the importance of taking command.
No, so I want you to follow me. We're going to go down below.
The unit has a huge challenge: protect ports without disrupting commerce. The Coast Guard has trained 4 teams this year, with plans for 2 more next year and 6 later. The dozen units eventually will patrol our 95,000 miles of coastline and 361 ports, ready to deal with any threat, anywhere, anytime. Terrorists may try to enter America by sea, but the easier path is over land. Here in Yuma, Arizona, authorities know all about the challenges of securing the border.
Hey, ¿qué tienes?
Since September 11th, the Border Patrol hasn't really changed its tactics so much as its technology. So says Yuma Sector Chief Michael Nicely.
We've got better intelligence sharing capabilities now, and we're able to better identify specific threats and respond to those threats.
This ID system, added after September 11th, scans fingerprints in Yuma and sends them to the FBI, where they're matched against terrorist watch lists. Border agents also can use camera towers and seismic sensors that alert authorities to potential intruders.
It's going to be, looks like a pretty good hard count of 6.
Yet for all the gadgetry, much of the work comes down to old-fashioned tracking. Experienced agents can identify and count shoe prints.
At least 4 or 5 went through here last night.
At dawn, helicopters race 20 to 30 feet above the desert floor looking for tracks. After all, cameras and cruisers can cover only part of the 76,000 square miles of the Yuma sector.
Since 9/11, I know we've increased our patrols.
The Border Patrol is due for a huge increase in funds. It'll lead to a 55% increase in the number of agents in the Yuma sector. As agents wait for Washington to approve that increase, the vigil at the border goes on. Information warfare experts warn in this report that 30 computer specialists sprinkled strategically around the globe could bring the U.S. to its knees by shutting down electric power grids, disabling air traffic control, and crippling the nation's financial and commercial infrastructure. Larry Mefford is Assistant Director of the FBI's Cyber Division, which has the job of foiling such attacks.
We're focusing on the cyber terrorism threat today, probably to a much greater degree than we did prior to 9/11.
The job demands extraordinary vigilance because the internet never sleeps. A cyber attack could come at any time.
The first way we would find out about it would generally be through our watch and warning unit, a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation that we maintain here at FBI headquarters.
Engineers in the Malicious Code Analysis Lab pour over millions of lines of code trying to nab hackers. The lab has a library of all known viruses and worms, but researchers are ready for what they call a zero-day exploit, a new and unknown virus.
If we haven't seen it, it's going to take us more time to reverse engineer it, to look at it, see how complex it is.
Many horrified viewers of the September 11th carnage said the attacks looked almost like a movie. This may account for the origin of the hottest document in Washington. The Army, eager for fresh thinking about terror targets and potential terrorists, approached Dick Lindheim, head of the Institute of Creative Technology and a former vice president at Paramount.
If this was like a movie, can we have the creative people, entertainment people, help us to visualize what other things might happen so we can be prepared for them?
Lindheim gathered some of the movie industry's best action-adventure creators and established the Entertainment Task Force Project. Participants swore to keep the project and their roles a secret. They met at night in the ICT headquarters in Marina del Rey, conjuring up possible attacks and attackers. They drafted a dozen terrorist scenarios, ranked their probabilities, and sent the report to the Pentagon. Yet for all the secrecy, the Army has yet to classify the document, so Fox News has filed a Freedom of Information Act request for release of the scenarios. Attorney General John Ashcroft knows that Hollywood scenarios are helpful, but good intelligence is essential.
I am keenly aware of the fact that these threats can materialize, and that unless interrupted, intercepted, displaced, a real threat matures into something that is a tremendous tragedy.
His concerns include the ultimate nightmare scenario.
We know with a relatively high degree of certainty that the terrorist community was researching the ability to develop nuclear bombs and has been pursuing other studies in the nuclear arena.
So far, American authorities have succeeded in preventing further bloodshed, but Ashcroft tempers optimism with caution.
I believe that we have clearly disrupted, interrupted, delayed terrorist activity, and we need to continue to do so.
Vice President Dick Cheney offers another approach to crushing terror. Break the spirit of our would-be adversaries by making good on our promises to win.
It's a question of respect. And I think it counts for a great deal. You can see the way other nations respond to the United States when we're strong and decisive.
And what would the Vice President say to would-be terrorists?
You'd be wise to hang it up. Go find other employment.
Now, Cheney concedes that a proposed Department of Homeland Security could be large and unwieldy, but he also adds that bureaucracies have a magical ability to become nimble and focused in times of war, times like September 11th, 2001 and September 11th, 2002. And I can tell you, Britt, here in this port city of Portsmouth, Virginia, a place with extensive commercial and military port activity, people are both nimble and focused. Britt?
Tony, thank you very much, and thanks to Catherine Herridge as well. Right now, some Fox stations will break away to bring you the local news headlines. For others, though, stay tuned for continuing Fox News coverage.